The restaurant was a sanctuary of wealth and exclusivity. Low, golden lighting bathed each table in a soft glow, casting delicate shadows across the velvet chairs and the polished mahogany floors. The clinking of glasses, the gentle hum of hushed conversations, and the slow, deliberate notes of a grand piano created a symphony of quiet luxury. Keanu Reeves sat alone at a corner table, his back to the wall, a habit he had developed over the years. It was late, past 9, and the dinner rush had settled into a comfortable lull. He had chosen this place because of its discretion. No paparazzi, no unwanted attention. Just a quiet evening with a simple meal. But his solitude was about to be shattered. At first, it was nothing more than a murmur. A quiet exchange between 3 waiters near the bar, their voices low but edged with unmistakable amusement. Keanu wasn't one to eavesdrop, but something in their tone caught his attention. A cruelty that didn't belong in a place like this. Then he heard the words, "Oh my God, she's here." One of them snickered. "I know, right?" Another whispered, barely containing his laughter. "What? Did she think she could just walk in like she belongs?" Keanu's grip on his fork tightened. He glanced over toward the bar, where the 3 men stood huddled, their backs partially turned to the dining floor. Their eyes, however, kept darting toward a nearby table. He followed their gaze. There, sitting alone at a table by the window, was her. A well-known actress. Not a superstar, but a woman who had carved out a respectable career over the years. She had been in indie films, a few blockbusters, even an award-winning drama. Talented, elegant, a person who had never chased fame, only the love of her craft. And yet, tonight, she looked small. She was pushing her food around her plate, barely eating. Her shoulders were hunched slightly, as if trying to make herself invisible. Keanu noticed the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she reached for her wine glass. She had heard them. The waiters, oblivious too, or perhaps enjoying her discomfort, continued their whispered assault. God, remember that flop she was in? So cringe. I don't even know why she still tries. It's just sad. Maybe she thought some rich guy would take pity on her. Spoiler, not happening. Keanu felt something cold settle in his chest. It wasn't just rude. It was cruel. He had been in Hollywood long enough to know how brutal the industry could be, especially to women. One bad movie, one misstep, and the world was ready to discard you. But to hear it here, so openly, from people who were supposed to be professionals? Unacceptable. He could have ignored it. He could have pretended he hadn't heard. But that wasn't who he was. Keanu set his napkin down, exhaled slowly, and stood up. The restaurant was about to witness something it would never forget. The tension in the air shifted as Keanu walked toward the bar, his steps unhurried but deliberate. The waiters didn't notice him at first, too engrossed in their conversation. It wasn't until he reached the counter and casually leaned against it that one of them glanced up, and his face paled. "Oh, Mr. Reeves," the man stammered. The other 2 froze, their laughter dying instantly. Is everything okay?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch, let them squirm under the weight of his presence. He could feel the eyes of nearby diners on him now, curiosity flickering across their faces. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said. His eyes locked onto the man who had spoken the cruelest words. "You were talking about someone?" The waiter swallowed hard. "Oh, we were just an actress," Keanu continued, cutting him off. "A guest in this restaurant." The 3 men glanced at each other, shifting nervously. One of them forced an awkward chuckle. "We didn't mean anything by it. Just, joking around." Keanu's expression didn't change. "Joking?" he repeated. His voice was still calm, but something in his tone made the air feel heavier. "Because from where I was sitting, it didn't sound like a joke." The waiter's smile faltered. "It was just a harmless conversation." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Harmless." He let the word hang between them for a moment before continuing. "Tell me something. Do you think she didn't hear you?" Silence. Keanu's gaze flickered toward the woman at the window. She was staring down at her plate, her posture stiff, her jaw set. "She heard you," he said simply. The smallest of flinches from one of the waiters confirmed what they all knew. Keanu took a step closer. "Do you know what it takes to do what she does? To put yourself out there, in front of the world, knowing that people like you are waiting for the first chance to tear you down?" The lead waiter swallowed. We didn't mean." Keanu didn't let him finish. "You work in this restaurant," he said, his voice still quiet but carrying an authority that sent chills down their spines. "Do you think if someone came in here and mocked your work, humiliated you in front of your customers, you'd laugh it off?" No answer. Or would it hurt? Still nothing. Keanu nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." The entire restaurant had gone silent now. Even the pianist had stopped playing. Every single person was watching, listening. Keanu let out a small breath and shook his head. "You have no idea who she is, do you?" "Not really." One of the waiters looked confused. "I mean, she's an actress. She's more than that," Keanu interrupted. "She's a person. A person who has spent years building something. A person who, despite all the pressure, all the criticism, keeps going." He glanced back toward her table again, his eyes softening for a brief moment. Then he turned back to the waiters, his gaze steely once more. "She deserves respect." The weight of his words settled over them, heavy and undeniable. One of the waiters, perhaps the youngest, shifted uncomfortably, his face reddening. He glanced toward the woman, guilt creeping into his expression. Keanu let the silence linger, making sure his message had sunk in. Then, finally, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the counter. "So," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "you're going to go over there. You're going to apologize. And you're going to mean it." The waiters hesitated. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Or I can talk to your manager." That did it. The lead waiter quickly nodded, his face pale. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. Right away." Keanu didn't move as he watched them shuffle toward the woman's table, their confidence replaced by nervous shame. He waited, his arms crossed, as they approached her, their voices low and humbled as they stammered their apologies. She didn't say anything at first. She simply looked at them, studying their faces. Then, slowly, she turned her head, and her eyes met Keanu's. For the first time that evening, she smiled. Keanu nodded once. Then, without another word, he returned to his seat. But the night was far from over. Something even more unexpected was about to happen. The silence in the restaurant felt thick, pressing against the walls like an invisible force. The waiters stood stiffly beside the woman's table, their faces flushed with embarrassment as they muttered their apologies. The diners closest to the scene had all but abandoned their meals, their eyes darting between the woman and Keanu Reeves, who had since returned to his seat. For a moment, she said nothing. Her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, her expression unreadable. Then, she slowly lifted her gaze, looking each of them in the eye. "I heard everything," she said quietly. The waiters shifted, shame washing over them in waves. "I won't pretend it didn't hurt," she continued, "because it did." One of the waiters, the younger one, dropped his gaze to the floor, looking like he wanted to disappear. "But I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me." Her voice remained calm, controlled. "I just hope next time, you'll think twice before doing this to someone else." The head waiter opened his mouth, as if searching for a way to salvage the situation, but no words came. "Enjoy your evening," she added, dismissing them with nothing more than a glance. It was a graceful response, dignified, but Keanu could see what most people couldn't: the tension in her shoulders, the way she still hadn't taken a bite of her food, the way her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her napkin. This wasn't just about tonight. This was a wound that had been opened before, one that had never really healed. Keanu exhaled softly and turned his attention back to his plate, hoping the moment had passed. But then, something happened that no one expected. The restaurant owner appeared, a short, impeccably dressed man in his 50s, with silver hair slicked back and a sharp, almost hawk-like gaze. He approached the woman's table with a slow, measured stride, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. The moment he arrived, the tension thickened again, this time in a different way. Keanu didn't like the look on his face. "Ma'am," the owner said, his voice smooth but unmistakably condescending, "I'd like to personally apologize for my staff's behavior." The woman, who had been moments away from taking a sip of her wine, paused. "I appreciate that," she said cautiously. The owner nodded, then added, "However, I do hope you understand. It was all in jest. No real harm intended." Keanu's eyes narrowed. The woman's expression remained calm, but Keanu could see the faint flicker of something behind her eyes. "I see," she said. The owner smiled, as if the matter had been settled. But then he did something unexpected. He leaned in slightly and, in a much lower voice, said, "You have to admit, though, this isn't really your crowd, is it?" Keanu's breath stilled. The woman went rigid. And just like that, the moment turned from uncomfortable to unbearable. She placed her glass down with deliberate slowness, her fingers tightening around the stem for just a second before letting go. The room had fallen completely silent again, but this time, there was a different energy in the air. Keanu felt it. This wasn't just about an insult. This was a blatant dismissal, a quiet but cutting way of saying, "You don't belong here." The woman opened her mouth. Whether to defend herself or to simply leave, Keanu wasn't sure. But before she could say a single word, Keanu stood up. This time, when he moved, there was no hesitation. His chair scraped back, the sound slicing through the quiet like a blade. Every head in the restaurant turned toward him as he made his way over to the table. His steps were slow, controlled, but there was no mistaking the quiet storm in his posture. The owner straightened slightly, clearly surprised. "Mr. Reeves," he said smoothly, shifting his attention toward him, "is there something I can do for you?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He reached the table and, with a quiet but unmistakable authority, pulled out the chair across from the woman and sat down. The message was clear. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was making it clear, for everyone to see, that she did belong here. That she wasn't alone. The woman blinked at him, stunned. Keanu gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning his attention back to the owner. "There's something I don't understand," Keanu said evenly, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "I've been coming to this restaurant for years. I've brought friends, colleagues. I've never had a problem." The owner hesitated, sensing the shift in power. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. You've always been a valued guest." Keanu nodded slowly. "Good. Because I've always believed a restaurant like this prides itself on excellence, on respect, on dignity." The owner's fingers twitched at his sides. "So you'll have to help me out here," Keanu continued, his gaze locking onto the man's, "because I'm having a hard time understanding why one of your guests, someone who came here to enjoy a meal just like the rest of us, is being treated like she doesn't deserve to be here." The owner swallowed. Keanu leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. His voice dropped, but the entire restaurant could still hear him. "You know what I think?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "I think you let your staff set the tone. I think you saw what happened, and instead of correcting it, you decided to add to it." "Mr. Reeves, I assure you, I'm not finished," Keanu said, his voice quiet but firm. The owner's mouth snapped shut. "I've seen a lot of things in this industry," Keanu continued, his gaze never wavering. "I know what people like her go through. The way they're judged for every little thing. The way people like you decide who's in and who's out like it's some kind of game." A beat of silence. "But I don't play games," Keanu said simply. "And I don't spend my money in places that think this kind of behavior is okay." The words landed like a thunderclap. A few people gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The owner looked like he had been punched in the gut. Keanu didn't have to spell it out. He knew exactly what was happening. A celebrity like Keanu Reeves leaving a restaurant over poor treatment? The damage to his reputation would be immediate and irreversible. Keanu stood up again, turning to the woman. "Would you like to eat somewhere else?" For the first time all night, she really smiled. "Yes," she said softly. I'd like that. And then, right in front of everyone, Keanu pulled out his wallet, threw several $100 bills on the table. Not for the restaurant, but for the actress, and turned to leave. The woman stood up, and together, they walked toward the exit. The moment they stepped outside, a wave of applause erupted from inside the restaurant. Keanu didn't look back. He had made his point, but something told him this night wasn't over yet. The cold night air hit them the moment they stepped outside. The contrast between the suffocating tension of the restaurant and the quiet openness of the street was almost jarring. The woman inhaled deeply, as if trying to cleanse herself of the entire experience. She clutched her coat a little tighter around her shoulders, exhaling a slow breath before turning to Keanu. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, though there was no mistaking the gratitude in her voice. Keanu shrugged in that effortless way of his. "Yeah, I did." She studied him for a moment, searching his face for something. An explanation, maybe. Some deeper reason why a man like Keanu Reeves, an A-lister who could have ignored the entire thing, had chosen to stand up for her. "I've been where you are," he said simply, as if reading her mind. The woman blinked. "Keanu, you're famous now?" He smiled faintly. "Sure, but I wasn't always." She frowned slightly, and he knew she was trying to picture it. Keanu Reeves, Hollywood royalty, struggling to belong. Keanu shoved his hands in his pockets, his expression distant. "I remember the first time I realized I was disposable. It was after Johnny Mnemonic bombed. Studio execs stopped taking my calls. Directors I'd worked with acted like I was invisible." He paused. "People made jokes, just like they did tonight. And I heard them." The woman's lips parted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Keanu exhaled through his nose. "You start to believe it after a while. That maybe they're right. That maybe you really don't belong." He turned to face her fully. "But they're wrong. You do." A lump formed in her throat. She glanced away, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. Keanu didn't push. He knew how it felt to hold onto those wounds, to pretend they didn't sting. For a long moment, they just stood there on the sidewalk, the quiet hum of the city buzzing around them. Then, suddenly, "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu and the woman turned. A young woman, no older than 20, stood a few feet away, clutching her phone with wide, nervous eyes. I'm sorry to bother you," she stammered, shifting on her feet. I saw what happened in there, and I just wanted to say." She hesitated, then smiled, genuine and bright. "That was incredible." Keanu gave her a small, warm nod. "Thanks." The girl glanced toward the actress. "And you," she said hesitantly. "I've seen your movies. You're amazing." The woman blinked, as if startled by the kindness. "Oh, thank you." The girl's expression softened. "Don't let them get to you, okay?" Something in the woman's face changed. A flicker of surprise, maybe even emotion, crossed her features before she smiled. A real, full smile. "I won't," she promised. The girl beamed. Can I get a picture with you both?" Keanu chuckled. "Only if you promise not to sell it to TMZ." The girl laughed, pulling out her phone. Keanu and the actress leaned in, and she snapped the photo, her excitement practically radiating off her. "Thank you so much," she gushed before hurrying off, her steps practically bouncing. The moment she disappeared into the night, the actress turned to Keanu, shaking her head in disbelief. "I think that's the first time someone said something like that to me in a long time." Keanu's smile was knowing. "You should get used to it." She huffed a soft laugh, rolling her eyes. "You're ridiculous. And you're a great actress." The laughter died in her throat. She looked at him, searching his face, trying to determine if he really meant it. He did. She smiled again. Smaller this time, but filled with something deeper. Hope. Keanu nodded toward the street. "Come on. Let's go get some real food." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And where's that?" Keanu smirked. "You ever had a late-night burger from a food truck?" Her lips parted, amused. "You're serious. Dead serious." She hesitated for only a moment before shaking her head with a chuckle. Fine, but if I see even one paparazzi, Keanu raised a hand in a mock scout's honor. Trust me, they don't hang around taco stands at midnight. The woman laughed, shaking her head again, and for the first time that night, the weight in her shoulders seemed to lift. Together, they walked off into the city, leaving behind the cruelty of that restaurant, choosing, instead, to embrace the kindness of the world waiting beyond it. And somewhere, in the hands of a young woman who had witnessed it all, a photo of Keanu Reeves and a once disheartened actress would soon make its way online, reminding millions that kindness always wins.